The email subject line read, "I found your bottle." I froze mid-sip of my coffee, nearly spilling it across my keyboard. For a second, I thought it had to be spam, some weird phishing attempt, but my gut told me it wasn't. My heart began to race as I clicked it open, my mind immediately flashing back to that day 2 years ago when I'd stood on a rocky coastline, holding an empty glass bottle with a note inside, not expecting anyone to ever see it again. The message was short, almost shy. "Hello. My name is Mara. I live in South Africa. Yesterday, I found your bottle washed up on the shore here. I read your note, and I think we need to talk." I stared at the screen, my hands suddenly clammy. 2 years. Thousands of miles. And somehow, against every logical probability, my words had made it across an ocean point 2 years earlier. I'd been standing on the wind-lashed cliffs of a small coastal town in Maine, trying to make sense of the wreckage of my life. My engagement had just ended in a spectacular implosion, my job was teetering on the edge of redundancy, and I was starting to think I'd made every wrong choice a person could make. That morning, while walking along the shoreline, I'd spotted an old green glass bottle tangled in a clump of seaweed. It was empty, weathered, and for reasons I still can't explain, I took it home. That night, after one too many whiskeys, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote a letter. Not to anyone in particular, just to whoever finds this. It wasn't some romanticized message about dreams or love. It was raw, a confession of all the mistakes I'd made, and a single question scrawled at the bottom. "If you find this, tell me, does life get better?" I sealed it, rolled it up, and shoved it back into the bottle. The next day, I drove to the edge of the cliffs and hurled it as far as I could into the churning Atlantic. I remember thinking it would probably just smash against the rocks, that it would be gone before it ever had the chance to be found. Back in the present, I read Mara's email 3 more times before replying. My fingers hovered over the keys, unsure of what to say. Eventually, I typed, "Hi Mara. I can't believe you actually found it. Yes, I'm the one who wrote that note. I didn't think anyone would ever see it. How did it get to you?" I hit send, feeling a strange mix of anticipation and dread. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of my apartment building sounded like my inbox pinging. When her reply came the next morning, I read it before I even got out of bed. She told me she'd been walking along a remote beach outside Cape Town when she saw something glinting among the shells. The bottle was intact, the cork swollen but holding. She'd pried it open and unrolled my letter right there on the sand. And when she read my question, she said it stopped her in her tracks because she'd been asking herself the same thing. Over the next few days, our emails grew longer. At first, they were cautious, like we were feeling around the edges of each other's lives. She told me about her work at a small coastal cafe, the way the ocean could be calm one day and violent the next, how she sometimes walked along the shore at night to clear her head. I told her about the biting winters in Maine, about how the sea near me always smelled faintly of pine and salt, about my failed engagement and the hollow silence it had left behind. Then, without really meaning to, we began to share the darker parts. She confessed that when she found my bottle, she'd just lost her younger brother to a sudden illness, and for weeks, she'd been questioning whether anything in life ever truly got better. "When I saw your question," she wrote, "I felt like someone out there had been listening without even knowing me." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I'd written that question half as a joke, half as a cry into the void. I hadn't imagined it might land in someone's hands at the exact moment they needed to hear it. And yet here we were, 2 strangers on opposite ends of the world, bound together by a battered glass bottle and a desperate question. I started checking my inbox obsessively. Her emails became the thing I looked forward to most in the day. There was something about the honesty of it, the way we had nothing to gain or lose from each other except the truth, that made it feel more real than almost any relationship I'd had in years. The decision to move from email to video wasn't dramatic. It was a single line at the end of her note, "Would it be strange if we talked face to face?" Followed by a winking emoji that made my stomach flip like I was 16 again. We set a time that barely made sense across time zones, a sliver of morning for me and late evening for her, and when the screen connected, there she was, a woman with wind-tangled hair and the kind of tired, bright eyes that say life has been heavy but hasn't won. For a second neither of us spoke. We just smiled like we were trying to reconcile the person we'd built in our heads with the person in front of us. Hi, she said at last, her accent softening the word into something that felt like a greeting and a question at the same time. I said hi back, and then the conversation rushed out of us the way waves do when they finally find shore. She showed me the little corner of her flat that doubled as a studio, watercolors clipped to a wire, a chipped mug full of brushes, a potted succulent leaning shamelessly toward the lamp. I turned my laptop toward the window so she could see the stubborn pine that had somehow grown sideways outside my building, clawing for light between brick and sky. We traded small things that felt big. She hates papaya. I can't sleep without a fan. She runs when she's angry. I clean. She still has the bottle on her kitchen shelf like a talisman. I still have the beach where I threw it saved on my phone like a wound and a map. When the call began to buffer and the sound stuttered, we laughed at the screen freeze faces we each made, and when it snapped back, we were already mid-story again, her telling me about the day she spread her brother's ashes, how the wind shifted and dusted her shoes gray. Me admitting I didn't go to my ex's wedding even though the invitation sat on my desk for weeks like a dare. At some point she picked up the bottle and held it so close to the camera I could see tiny bubbles trapped in the old glass. "It smells like salt if you put your nose right here," she said, and did, scrunching her face. "Either that or my kitchen needs help." We both laughed too long because it was easier than crying, and then we let the quiet be quiet. "Your question," she said finally, thumb tracing the curve of the bottle, "about whether life gets better." I don't have a neat answer. I swallowed. Me neither. She nodded once, decisive. But I think it gets wider. Not easier. Just more room for the pain and the good to stand next to each other without one canceling the other. The way she said it lodged in my chest like a lighthouse you can't unsee once you've spotted it. We talked until her evening became night and my morning became late, promising to keep it to an hour and then ignoring our own rules. When we finally said goodbye, the screen went black and I sat there in the reflection of my own neighborhood morning, realizing that a rusted bottle and a reckless question had opened a door I hadn't known I was still knocking on. Over the weeks that followed, our calls became a rhythm, twice a week at first, then more often, until we stopped counting altogether. We didn't plan topics, but somehow we always had something to say. She'd show me the sky over Cape Town at sunset, streaked with impossible pinks, while I'd point my phone toward the Atlantic in Maine, the water cold and gray but alive. It was surreal how the ocean between us could feel like nothing and everything at once. One night, during a storm on her side of the world, the video connection dropped. I thought it was over for the night, but then my phone lit up with a photo from her, a candlelit table with the bottle in the middle. The message read, "The waves are loud tonight. I'm keeping it close." I stared at it for a long time, imagining her sitting in that dim light, rain on the windows, the bottle between her hands like a link neither of us wanted to break. It wasn't romantic. Not exactly. At least, not in the way people expect. But it was intimate. It was knowing someone's voice in the dark, understanding their silences, trusting them with the parts of you that don't make it into casual conversation. And that intimacy made the next part hit harder than I could have prepared. 4.1 morning, she didn't call. No message. No photo. Just quiet. I told myself she was busy, but the second day came and went the same way. On the third day, I sent an email, short and nervous. "Everything okay?" Hours passed. Then came her reply, 3 lines that made my stomach turn. "I'm sorry I disappeared. Something happened. I'll explain soon." I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment our story stopped being about coincidence and started being about choice. When she finally called, it was past midnight for me. The second her face appeared on the screen, I knew something was wrong. Her eyes were red, the skin around them puffy, like she'd been crying for hours. She didn't even say hello. "I almost didn't tell you," she began, voice hoarse, "because I didn't want this to change, whatever this is between us." My chest tightened. "Mara, you can tell me anything." She looked down, took a shaky breath. 2 weeks ago, I found a lump." She didn't have to finish the sentence. My mind had already gone there. "I went for tests. Yesterday they called. It's cancer." The word hung there like a stone between us. I had no script for this. No neat, comforting phrases. All I could do was listen as she told me about the whirlwind of appointments, the treatment plan they wanted to start immediately, the way her whole world had shrunk into hospital corridors and waiting rooms. And the worst part, she said, her voice breaking, is that I was starting to believe life could get better. You were part of that. And now it just feels like the ocean pulled it all back out again. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she'd beat it, that we'd laugh about this someday, but the truth was I didn't know. What I did know was that there was no universe in which I'd just fade into the background now. Mara, I said, steady as I could, you're not going through this alone. I don't care how many oceans are in the way. She smiled through her tears, small but real. You're stubborn, you know that? Good, I said. That means I'll be hard to get rid of. That night, after we hung up, I sat in the dark, staring at my phone, thinking about that battered green bottle sitting on her shelf. It had carried my question to her when she needed it. Maybe now, somehow, I could carry hers back. The weeks that followed fell into a new rhythm, one neither of us would have chosen, but one we clung to. Mornings for me became evenings for her, and instead of our wandering, story-filled calls, we now talked from hospital rooms. Sometimes she'd have her scarf wrapped loosely around her head, joking about how she looked like an artist from a French film. Other times, she'd be lying down, her voice thin but still finding ways to tease me about my inability to make a proper cup of tea. I sent her care packages, books I thought she'd like, silly postcards, a knit beanie that my mother made when I told her why it mattered. She sent me photos from her hospital bed, the ocean visible from the window, a paper crane a nurse had made her, the bottle always there on the bedside table like a witness. And, through all of it, we never stopped talking about that question, does life get better? Though now it had changed shape. It wasn't about someday, it was about today. Then one night, months later, she said, I've been thinking about something. When this is over, I want to meet you. Not on a screen. Not through a letter in a bottle. In person. I laughed, but it was a laugh that came from somewhere deep. I was hoping you'd say that before I had to bring it up. Her treatment ended in late spring. She sent me a photo the day she rang the hospital bell, her hair just starting to grow back, her smile bigger than I'd ever seen it. I'm ready, she wrote. 2 weeks later, I was stepping off a plane in Cape Town. My heart pounded as I scanned the crowd, and then there she was, smaller than I'd imagined, but solid, alive. We didn't say anything at first. We just hugged, the kind of hug that folds years and oceans into nothing. That night, sitting by the sea with the bottle between us, we talked until the stars faded into morning. At one point she said, you know, I think I finally have an answer. To what? I asked, though I knew. To your question, she said, eyes on the horizon. Life doesn't just get better. Sometimes, it gives you back more than you ever thought you'd lost. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it.